Mara Quint found the first child at the bottom of a 4-day hunt for a leak that did not exist, wedged into the dead space behind the aft water tank, with her knees against her chin and her hands pressed flat over her own mouth, as if silence were a thing you could physically hold in. The pry bar was still in Mara's fist. The access panel was still swinging on its one good hinge, and the child's eyes, two large, amber, doubled-lidded, were already wet with the specific ancient terror of someone who has been found. For 3 full seconds, neither of them moved. Then a blade came out of the dark to Mara's left, low and fast, and stopped an inch from her ribs. It was a packing knife. Ship issue, the kind used for cutting strap band and foam, the kind that lived in every cargo hold in human space and had no business being held by second alien child, older, taller, gray-skinned, ears flat back against her skull, who had unfolded out of the gap between the tank brackets like she had been grown there. The girl's arm shook. The blade did not. "You'll want to put that down," Mara said. "You'll want to step back," the girl said. Her trade was accented but exact, every word filed to fit. "She's small, she gets sick if she's frightened. Step back and we'll talk about what you're owed." Owed. That was the word that did it. Not the knife, not the stowaways, not the 4 days of chasing 11% excess load on her scrubbers through every duct of a ship she could not afford to be wrong about. A child was hiding behind her water tank holding a knife at a stranger's ribs, and her opening position was a negotiation about debt. "What I'm owed," Mara repeated, "air, water, calories." The girl's flat ears trembled and pinned harder. "I've kept count. 11 days, 3 of us, quarter rations. I can tell you the number to the gram. We'll work it off or we'll owe it formal. Your choice. But you're not touching her. 3 of us." Mara took one slow step back from the knife, which is what you do when a frightened person points one at you, and turned her head, which is what you do when you have just been told the count is wrong. The third one was above her. He had come down the tank's service ladder without a sound and stopped halfway, a boy, narrower than the older girl, one hand hovering near the rungs without quite gripping them, his face aimed at her with the strange fractional wrongness of someone aiming by ear. 11 days, quarter rations. They had boarded at V Anchorage with the resin pallets then. They had been breathing her margin for a week and a half while she ran diagnostics on her own scrubbers and swore at ghosts. "Captain?" Tully's voice came down the trunk corridor ahead of his boots, unhurried, the way everything about Tully was unhurried. "Tell me you found the leak, because I've stripped that recycler to the—" He came around the tank housing and stopped. 61 years old, greased to the elbow, a man who had been shot at by 3 navies and bored by all of them. He looked at the knife, the girl behind it, the small one in the panel gap, the boy on the ladder. "Huh," Tully said. "Leaks got names then." 3 of them, Mara said. "Apparently I'm owed to the gram." The little one in the panel gap chose that moment to cough, a deep, wet, double-unsuited sound no human throat would make. And the older girl's whole body flinched toward it without her blade arm moving at all. And that was the second thing Mara learned about her, after the counting. She had been doing this, whatever this was, for long enough that her body had learned to split itself in 2. "Put the knife down," Mara said, quieter. "Nobody on this ship hurts children. That's not a kindness, it's just a fact, like the air mix. Put it down and get her out of there before she chokes on tankside dust. And then you're going to sit in my galley and tell me who you're running from." The girl did not put the knife down. "Who says we're running? You boarded at a grain port with no luggage, and you've been rationing 11 days instead of stealing from my stores like amateurs," Mara said. "Runner's ration. Now galley, her first. There is a thing that happens in a standoff when one side decides you can see the decision land, like cargo settling onto its skids." The girl's ears came up a few degrees, the knife reversed in her grip, handle out, an offer and a test in one motion. Mara took it, folded it, and put it in her own pocket, and pretended not to notice that the girl watched the pocket like the knife was the last thing she owned. Which Mara would learn, it nearly was. The galley of the Kestrel's wage sat 6 people if 4 of them liked each other. Mara put the 3 stowaways on the bench, put a kettle on the coil, and stood across the fold-down table, doing the thing she did best in the world, which was math. 11 days of 3 children's air and water against the lean schedule in her cabin. The fuel margin to Tarsk Depot against the cough rattling in the small one's chest. The cost of feeding them against the cost of the fine if a registry inspector found 3 undocumented alien minors aboard a mortgaged human. Freighter against the cost. She did this math too. She was not proud of it, but she did it. Of simply not having opened the panel. They were Yevath. She'd guessed it from the ears and the doubled eyelids, and known it from the cough. Half the refugee corridors out of the Varus Ring were full of Yevath since the bombardment, gray-skinned and ash-quiet, a people whose orbital habitats had been cracked open in a war that had not even been about them. These 3 were nobody's mystery. The galaxy made thousands of them a year, The older girl said their names like she was signing a contract. Rin herself, Seth, the boy, who sat with his shoulder against hers and his eyes aimed slightly past Mara's ear. Nim, the small one, who was holding the mug of hot water like it was the first warm thing in living memory, and whose eyes, enormous even for a Yevoth, amber going copper at the rim, had not left Mara's face since the hold. And the rest of it, Mara said. There's no rest of it. We're orphans off the ring. We're going to Loswick. There's a place there that takes us in. Ryan's recitation was smooth as hull plate. We'll work passage. I keep accounts. Seth can splice line and pack foam. Nim small. She can reach things. She can reach things, Mara repeated. Everyone on a ship needs things reached. Tully in the hatchway made a sound into his tea that he disguised badly as a cough. Mara looked at them. The negotiator, the quiet boy, the little one watching her with that unnerving copper-rimmed attention, and felt the decision she ought to make sitting right there, obvious and clean. Tarsk Depot was 6 days out. Tarsk had a relief office, a Meridian compact desk, a whole apparatus that existed for exactly this. You did not get to keep things you found behind your water tank. You especially did not get to keep them when you were 3 payments from losing the deck under your own feet. Here's the deal, she said. You eat real rations, you sleep in the spare cabin, you work, light duty where I put you, nothing in the hold without me or Tully. At Tarsk, I hand you to the compact relief desk, and they sort you to Loswick the right way, with papers, on somebody's manifest as passengers instead of contraband. That's the whole negotiation. It's not open. Nim looked at Rin. Seth's head tilted, just slightly, reading the room with whatever he read it with. And Rin looked at Mara with an expression that was not gratitude and not relief, but something older and more careful than either, the look of a creditor assessing collateral, and said, 62,000. What? That's what 11 days cost you, at depot prices, air and water and the calories we did take. 62,410 in scrip. I'm telling you the numbers so that when we leave at Tarsk, you know exactly what we owe, and someday you get it back. We pay our. A pause. The first crack in the recitation, the ears dipping, we're not thieves. It was such a strange thing to insist on, not we're grateful, not don't hurt us, but we're not thieves, planted like a flag on ground nobody had attacked, that Mara heard it for what it was, even then, on the first day before she knew anything. A denial shaped exactly like the thing it was denying. She let it go. That was the first mistake she ever made about Ryan, and the most honest one. The Kestrel's wage ran with 2 souls because 2 was what the ledger allowed. She was an 80-meter wedge of bonded hull and bad paint, 4 holds and a long spine, built to haul mid-mass freight along the quarter runs and mortgaged to the Halloran port combined for more than she'd ever again be worth. Mara's father had signed that mortgage when Mara was 9, flown the ship for 19 years, and died of a stroke in the pilot's chair at dock, gently between contracts, the only gentle thing the business ever did for him, leaving her the helm, the debt, and a payment schedule with no entry for sentiment. She was 27. She had been captain for 3 years, owner in name and hostage, in fact, and she knew to the hour how long she could keep both. 9 months, if nothing broke. The Combine's lien inspector boarded at every 4th port of call to confirm the collateral, her ship, was being maintained to standard. The next inspection was Tarsk. The penalty clause for late freight on her current run was 8,000 a day. These were the load-bearing numbers of her life, and she recited them to herself the way other people prayed. So she put the stowaways to work because idle mass was a sin against the ledger, and because work was the only language in which she knew how to be kind. It went better than it had any right to. Ryan took to the manifest terminal like she'd been raised in one, and maybe she had. She said her parents had worked freight side on the ring before. Within 2 days, she had found a 400 scrip error in the resin contract that Mara herself had missed, flagged it without being asked, and stood waiting with her ears half-pinned, as if accuracy might be a punishable offense. Seth, the quiet boy, could splice line, really splice, navy neat, fingers reading the lay of the strands faster than most riggers read with their eyes, and he worked with a stillness that made Tully start leaving tools next to him just to see them come back cleaner. Nim attached herself to the galley, the greenhouse rack, and Mara's shadow, in roughly that order, and asked questions. Not many, just one at a time, deposited carefully, like coins into a machine she wasn't sure worked. Is the ship's name a bird? A kestrel's a bird, yeah? Small hawk. Hunts by holding still in the wind. A long pause, copper-rimmed eyes following Mara's hands across the board. What's the wage part? That's the joke, Mara said. It's what a kestrel earns for all that work. Nothing. It just gets to keep flying. Nim thought about that for the better part of a watch, then nodded, solemnly, like the ship's name had passed some private audit of hers, and from then on she touched the bulkhead each morning the way you'd greet a working animal. It would have been easy that first week. That was the thing Mara held on to afterward, turning it over like a stone she couldn't put down. How easy they made themselves. Quarter rations easy. Silent in the walls easy. 3 children who had so thoroughly learned the mathematics of being a burden that they had prepaid every cost in advance and itemized the rest. And if she had been paying the right kind of attention instead of the ledger kind, she would have asked much sooner what a person has to survive to come out budgeted like that. She was watching the boy on the second night instead. Seth was coiling line on the gantry walk above hold 2, tidy as print, and the amber strobe over the lift cradle started its rotation pre-move. Warning, the light every ship rat learns before they learn to read, and he didn't so much as turn his head. The lift whined. He kept coiling, serene, directly over the cradle's rise path, and Mara's shout and rise both hit the air in the same instant, and Seth stepped back off the painted line with a calm that arrived a half-second after his sister's voice, rather than the light. He gets absorbed, Ren said, already between him and Mara, already smoothing it, her trade quickening. In the work. He's careful. He's the most careful. It won't. Strobes for everybody, was all Mara said. But she looked at, in the place where she logged things, and what she logged was wrong because the conclusion she filed was a tired boy and a doting sister, and the truth was standing right there in front of her, at the foot of a service ladder, aiming its face slightly past her ear. 4 days out from Tarsk in the dead watch, Mara sat alone at the comm board with a mug going cold and the trade board scrolling, because debt has its own insomnia, and the boards were how she fed it. Freight postings, rate sheets, combined notices. And in the general bulletins, between a salvage auction and a quarantine advisory, a notice with a charity seal on it, blue and white, a stylized open hand. Dree Foundling sponsorship, ward recovery notice. 3 Yevith miners, wards of the sponsorship, missing from care en route via Anchorage, believed stowed away. Descriptions follow. The sponsorship advises these children are vulnerable and may be accompanied by false documentation or false accounts of their circumstances. Recovery fee for safe return or verifiable location, 40,000 scrip. Apply Michael Dree, principal, or any registered agent. 3 descriptions. She read them once. Eldest female, distinctive habit of itemizing. Male, sight impaired, conceals it. Youngest female, attachment behaviors, carries personal effects of sentimental value. Sight impaired, conceals it. Mara sat very still for a while. 40,000 scrip was 2 mortgage notes. It was the lien inspection passed with money in hand, the penalty clause survivable, 10 months of breathing room bought in 1 transmission. It was, by every number that ran her life, the answer, and it had arrived dressed as a good deed, return of wards to a registered charity, a thing she could do in daylight with her name on it. And they had lied to her. There's a place at Lostwick that takes us in. Wards of a sponsorship, run from care, may be accompanied by false accounts of their circumstances. The bulletin had told her politely that everything on her galley bench had been a story. And the part of Mara that had been keeping a ledger her whole life heard that, felt the cold satisfaction of an account balancing. They were somebody else's line item. There was a fee schedule. The universe had quoted her a price for making her problem someone else's, and the price was excellent. She opened a return channel to the bulletin's contact code. Her hand did that. She watched it do it. The channel hand shook, found a relay, and a voice came back. Not live, an answering protocol, a recorded greeting in a voice like warmed oil, multilingual, cycling. You have reached the recovery line of the Dree Foundling sponsorship. Your compassion is noted and will be compensated. Please state the ward's location and condition. If the wards resist recovery, do not engage. Our agents are trained in the handling of damaged children. Note that the recovery fee is paid in full only for the eldest ward delivered intact and able to answer questions. Condition requirements on the younger 2 are negotiable. Mara's hand was faster than her thought. The channel died under her palm. The galley clock hummed. Her heart was doing something stupid and arrhythmic against her ribs, and she sat in the dark of her own ship and replayed it, the warm oil voice with its trained vocabulary, and found the 3 phrases her body had understood before her head caught up. The handling of damaged children. The eldest ward intact and able to answer questions. Condition requirements on the younger 2 are negotiable. Negotiable. People wrote bulletins for lost cargo in exactly that grammar. She had written bulletins for lost cargo in exactly that grammar. Somewhere behind a blue and white open hand, a person called Michael Dree had sat down, thought about the recovery of 3 specific children, and budgeted for their damage, priced the little one's condition as a variable, required the eldest functional for interrogation only, and then he had published it in the open on the general boards, confident that nobody who read it would hear anything but the fee. She thought about Ryan flagging a 400 script error in a stranger's favor and standing braced for punishment. We pay our accounts. We're not thieves, able to answer questions. Questions about what? Mara deleted the contact code from her board's history, which changed nothing and felt necessary, and went down the spine corridor and stood outside the spare cabin in the red glow of the night cycle. The hatch was cracked. Inside, 3 children slept in one bunk. Despite there being 2, the boy against the wall, the little one in the middle, the eldest on the outside edge, between her family and the door, even unconscious, with one arm thrown over both of them and her flat ears, twitching at every tick of the hull. 6 days, she'd told them. At Tarsk, I hand you to the relief desk. Tarsk, or 40,000 script bulletin was scrolling on every contract board in the depot, where any registered agent could file for the fee, where 3 Yeveth children matching 3 published descriptions would walk off her ramp into a port full of people doing math. Damn it, Mara said, very quietly to the ship. The ship, being a kestrel, said nothing and kept flying. She didn't tell them about the bulletin in the morning. She told herself that was tactical. You don't brief a panic into people you may need calm, and stood in her own galley watching Nim methodically distribute protein mash into 4 bowls, and then, after a glance at Tully's bulk in the hatchway, a 5th, and understood that the real reason was simpler and worse. She didn't want to watch their faces do whatever their faces would do when they learned the hunt had a price on it now, published with a seal. Instead, she changed one word in her own plan and called it nothing. At Tarsk, I hand you over became through Tarsk, we keep our heads down. Fuel, the lean inspection, the cough. Nim's chest rattle had deepened, and whatever else was true, that needed a med bay and then out. And the question of Loswick and relief desks and what she was owed could wait one more port. It wasn't a decision, she told herself. It was a deferral. There was a difference, and she was almost sure she could still find it. Tarsk Depot announced itself a day early, the way trouble does. They were 30 hours out, decelerating down the corridor's traffic spine with the depot, still a bright pinhead on the scope, when the hail came in, not from Tarsk control, but from a small fast hull running an intercept vector off her port quarter, transponder squawking a registry Mara didn't know in a category she did. Private charter, light skiff, the kind of ship that exists to bring 6 people and a locked case somewhere quickly. Freighter Kestrel's wage, Vey Anchorage out of, this is the charter provident errand. The voice was young, official smooth, with a rehearsed warmth that sat on it like paint on rust. We represent the Dreefoundling sponsorship on a welfare matter. We have reason to believe 3 minor wards of the sponsorship may have stowed away, aboard your vessel at Vey. We're requesting permission to come alongside and board for a welfare check. This is a charitable matter, Captain, not an enforcement one. There's a recovery gratuity involved that I'd be glad to discuss. In the pilot's chair, Mara looked at the vector plot and did not look at the hatchway behind her, where she could feel more than hear that someone small had stopped breathing. She keyed the comm. Provide an errand Kestrel's wage. Negative on boarding. We're running under a biological quarantine flag, crew respiratory event, unidentified, 14 days isolation per corridor health code. You're welcome to follow us into Tarsk quarantine anchorage and take it up with the port physician. A pause the length of a man consulting someone off mic. Kestrel's wage, we don't show a quarantine flag on your transponder. Setting it now, Mara said and did and watched the skiff's vector hold steady while its silence got longer. The flag was real the moment she said it. That was the beauty of it. Quarantine was self-declared and criminally expensive to fake. 14 days of dock isolation and a physician's audit, a lie that cost more than most truths. They would be checking her tonnage, her mortgage, her margins, and concluding no one that poor would buy that lie. Captain Quint, a different voice, older, warmed oil. The recording from the recovery line, live now and unhurried, Mokul Dree, I won't keep you. You have 3 of my children. I have a sick crew and a schedule, Mr. Dree. Of course. I only want to say, and the voice did something then, lowered itself, became confiding, became the voice of a man leaning across a small table to share a reasonable burden with a reasonable woman. Whatever they've told you, they are not what they seem, the eldest in particular. She's a gifted child. I sponsored her education myself, and like many gifted children who've suffered, she has learned to be very, very plausible. She will have a story. It will have numbers in it. You strike me as someone who appreciates numbers, Captain, so here is mine, 40,000. For 1 hour at your airlock at Tarsk. You don't even have to be aboard. Don't be part of her story, Captain Quint. It doesn't end well for the people in it. The skiff peeled off its intercept before she answered, which told her the speech was the payload, which told her the man understood delivery, which frightened her more than the knife behind the water tank ever had. Mara sat with her hands flat on the board until the skiff's drive flare faded into the traffic haze. Then she turned the pilot's chair around. Ryan stood in the hatchway with Nim's hand crushed in hers and Seth's shoulder under her arm, all 3 of them ash-gray going paler, ears pinned flat as paint, arranged the way they'd been arranged behind the water tank, the eldest in front, between her family and the thing coming, and Mara watched the older girl assemble her face into the negotiator's calm, watched the breath go in, watched the opening offer of some new desperate contract begin its climb up her throat. Don't, Mara said. Don't bargain. You heard the flag. We're under quarantine. The three of you are my crew respiratory event, and nobody boards this ship for 14 days, by law, including charities. She let that sit half a beat. Galley, all of you, I want the real story this time, numbers and all. The real story came out the way cargo comes off a bad stack, top layer easy, everything under it wedged. The Dree Foundling sponsorship was registered on 4 worlds and decorated on 2. It collected war orphans, Yeveth mostly since the ring, small species, light-boned species whose children stayed small a long time. And it fed them and schooled them and put its blue and white open hand on their shoulders for the charity boards. That part was even true. Ryan laid it out flat-voiced, eyes on the table like she was reading someone else's manifest. And then there's the other ledger, she said. Wards earn their keep. That's how he says it. There's salvage work, rec fields, condemned stations, places insurance won't send adults because adults don't fit where the value is, conduit runs, ballast spaces. You go in with a cutter and a bag and a line on your ankle, and if the line comes back without you, you were never on any roster anyway. Her ears were flat. Her voice was a clerk's. Cephas the best at line work because he doesn't need light. I was his runner boss's accounts. Nim carries. Small things through small spaces to people who wait on the other side of walls. We never knew what. Knowing what is a cost, and he doesn't spend costs on wards. Drops, Tully said from the hatchway. He's running contraband drops with kids as the couriers. He calls them errands of the hand. Ryan's mouth did something that had learned to be a smile and thought better of it. There's a chapel reading first on drop days. Mara kept her hands still on the table. The galley light hummed. Nim had gone into the curve of Ryan's arm, doing her trick of becoming smaller than her own mass, and Seth sat very straight, face aimed at the middle distance, listening to everyone's breathing at once. Why does he want you back? Mara asked. Straight answer. A man like that doesn't burn charter fuel and 40,000 scrip on sentiment, and there are always more orphans. What is he actually missing? The pause was one beat too long, and in it the older girl's ears, which had been flat against her skull all through the worst of the telling, came. Up, smooth, composed themselves, and Mara learned her third thing about Rin. The calm was the tell, the fear was honest. The composure was constructed. He doesn't like losing things, Ryan said. It makes the other wards think the door's real. It was a good answer. It was even probably a true one. It arrived wearing the exact face of the 400 script error and the 62,000 count, plausible. Persist, she will have a story. It will have numbers in it. And Mara hated viscerally that the warm oil voice had gotten that far into her head and filed the pause where she filed things and moved on. 3 frightened children and a charity that rented them out by the kilogram. That was enough truth to act on. The rest could keep. Quarantine rules, she said. Until Tarsk is behind us, your sick crew. You don't show on a viewport, you don't touch the comm, and if anyone boards this ship, port physician, inspector, anyone, you're in the cabin with the hatch dogged, coughing. That last part. She nodded at Nim, who had been coughing all morning. Real and wet and worsening, won't be acting. Which is the other thing. You're seeing the physician. Wards don't see physicians, Rin said, reflexively, an old rule from an old world. And Mara felt something in her chest go hot and small. My crew does, she said. Tarsk Depot took them the way depots take quarantine ships, at arm's length, expensively. Quarantine anchorage was a gantry spur 2 kilometers off the main ring, where the Kestrel's wage was clamped, scanned, billed for isolation berthage at triple rate, billed again for the hazard premium on her cargo handling, and informed that the port physician would board within the day, and that any falsification of a biological flag was a criminal matter, which Mara acknowledged with a steady voice and a stomach full of gravel, because the flag had been a lie when she said it. It stopped being 1 hour before the physician arrived. Nim's cough had been climbing for 2 days, and on the gantry approach, it tipped over into something with a whistle in it, the small body working for air between the double notes, membranes half closed over the copper-rimmed eyes. Tankside dust, 11 days of it, in lungs built for habitat air, Yeveth lungs, with their fine double-chambered architecture that did everything human lungs did plus filter for ring dust, except when the filters themselves clogged. By the time Dr. Issa Marin came through the lock in her yellow isolation shell, there was a genuinely sick child aboard, and Mara's lie had quietly become the truth it had been pretending to be. Crew respiratory event, unidentified. Marin's was 40, flat-eyed, unhurried, the kind of physician ports get and keep because nothing surprises them anymore. If she was surprised that the crew respiratory event was 3 undocumented Yeveth minors, she spent the surprise in one slow blink and got to work, and Mara stood against the medbay bulkhead and watched a stranger be gentle with Nim. Broad yellow gauntlets dwarfing the gray wrist. Voice dropped into a register that made the membranes ease open, and felt something she had no time for and didn't name. Particulate bronchitis, secondary infection starting. She'll clear with a wash and 10 days of mist. She should have been seen a week ago. Marin said it without weight, which was its own weight. I'm scanning the other two. Don't argue, Captain. It's one flag, one event, one report, and the report reads better if I've laid hands on every respiratory tract aboard, including yours and the old man's. So they all filed through, and that was how it happened. Not a confession, not a crisis, just a port physician's thoroughness and a handheld scanner moving up from a quiet boy. chest routine to his throat, routine to his face. The scanner stopped. Look at the green dot for me, Marin said, conversational. A pause. It's to your left. Another pause, the boy's face aiming, hunting. The half-second lag Mara had seen on the gantry walk in the hold, at the foot of a ladder 100 times in 19 days and filed wrong every single time. Now my voice. There. That's better, isn't it? Don't, Seth said. The first word he'd volunteered to a stranger since Vey. It came out neither pleading nor sharp, but with a terrible practice lightness. Deflection number 10,000 in a long career of them. It's just the light in here. I'm tired. Marin looked at him for a moment. Then she turned the scanner around so its little display faced Mara. And Mara looked at the imaging of a Yeveth retina and saw it even untrained. The fine crystalline lattice creeping across the tissue like frost on a viewport, beautiful, in the way of many wrong things. Cryostatic retinopathy, Marin said in the galley after, with the kids dogged in their cabin and Tully pretending not to listen from the engine trunk. Veli, the relief clinics call it. It's a cold sleep injury. Yeveth retinal tissue crystallizes if the pod's shielding is substandard or the cycles run too fast. I'd guess he was transported in something rated for freight. She let Mara sit with that image precisely 1 second. It's progressive. He's compensating with hearing and habit, and Yavath hearing is good enough that he'll fool most people for months yet. He has maybe a year of useful sight, less in low light. After that, the lattice is fixed and nothing rebuilds behind it. And inside the year? Inside the year, a graft course rebuilds the tissue clean. It's not exotic. Any compact tier clinic does it. Marin's flat eyes didn't move. It's 110,000 script, Captain. I've seen your birth billing. I'm telling you the number because you strike me as someone who'd rather have it than not. 110,000. On top of triple-rate birthage, the penalty clause, the notes due, the 4 mouths. Mara heard the number land on the pile of numbers that ran her life and felt the whole stack shift and said, treat the little one. Log the event as resolved. What does the scan data? Where does your report go? Port health record, sealed medical. A fractional pause and the physician's first and only show of anything. Sealed, Captain, means sealed from anyone who hasn't bought a depot records clerk. I'd plan accordingly. She resealed her yellow shell and paused at the lock with her case in her hand. He asked me not to tell you while you were walking the little one back. Offered to work it off. Wanted to know how much sight a graft course costs in hours of labor. The flat eyes blinked once, slow. Whoever taught those children what they're worth, Captain. I hope someone's planning to take it up with him. Mara found Seth in the spare cabin in the red watchlight, sitting on the bunk edge with his hands quiet in his lap, aimed at the hatch she came through, having heard her decide to come, probably, before she knew it herself. She sat on the locker across from him, because looming had never once in history helped anything. How long have you known? Since the pod. Even now, the practice lightness. It's fine, I know the ship now, I count steps, I know the sounds. The strobes hum when they spin up. The amber one over the lift hums flat. Did you know that? I'm faster on a line blind than your riggers are sighted. You've seen, and then, because he was the quiet one but not the slow one, and could hear a silence getting heavy. Don't set me down, Captain. Whatever the doctor said it costs. I'll get cheaper, not dearer. I promise. I'm learning the ship. I don't break things. I eat the least of anyone. Stop, Mara said. And it came out rough enough that his ears flattened, and she had to sit there in the red light getting her own voice back under trim before she could say the rest. He waited. They were always all three of them so good at waiting. Nobody on this ship earns their eyes, she said finally. Or their lungs, or their rations, or their bunk. That math is over. You left it at Vey with him. You hear me? If you ever again price yourself to me by the hour, I'll. She heard where the sentence was going and let it go there, because iron was a language he trusted more than warmth. I'll dock you a day's pay for insulting my crew. A silence. And then a sound she hadn't heard from him before, brief and rusty and double-noted like the cough but lighter. A Yavath boy laughing, once, mostly in disbelief, and Mara got out of the cabin before her own face did anything unbecoming a captain, and stood in the spine corridor breathing like she'd been carrying crates, doing against her will, at 2 in the morning, The only thing she knew how to do with love, which was math. 110,000 for the eyes, 40 for the lungs and the birth and the scheduled bleeding, 8,000 a day. 2 notes due in 70 days, 19,000 each. The recovery fee scrolling on every board in the depot, 40,000 1 hour at your airlock, you don't even have to be aboard. She put her hand flat on the cold bulkhead the way Nim greeted the ship. We're keeping them, the ship did not say. She said it, quietly, in an empty corridor 2 kilometers off the Tarsk main ring, 11 months before she could afford to. Then she went forward and pulled the freight boards and started looking for any contract, any rate, going anywhere that didn't smell like the open hand. The Combine's lean inspector came aboard the next morning, suited and sour about it. A heavy, deliberate man named Garrick, who had inspected the Kestrel's wage 11 times in 3 years and never once smiled. He walked the spine, thumped the frames, ran his gauge over the drive trunk seals, billed 40 minutes of remote suit time to her account for the privilege, and dictated his findings in front of her as the code required. Collateral maintained to standard, 2 deficiency notes, scrubber stack overdue for media change, number 4 hold lighting below lumens. Mort Gagger status, current, margin thin, flagged for review. Review means what? Mara said. Means somebody upstairs reads your file twice. Garrick's voice through the suit grill was tired and not unkind. Means don't be late, Quint, not even once. There's parties been asking after corridor liens lately, buyers. Combined sells thin paper when somebody offers overbook for it, and a sold note's a called note half the time. You want my actual advice off the log? He clipped his gauge to his belt. Be boring. Boring paper doesn't sell. She walked him to the lock thinking about that buyers, asking after corridor liens, somebody offering overbook, and the thought was still standing there unattended an hour later when the port net pinged her board with a routine notice. Tarsk Port Health, supplemental inspection. Per quarantine protocol, a follow-up respiratory assessment team is dispatched to your berth. 2 assessors, credentials attached. The credentials looked right. The seals scanned right. The 2 figures who came up the gantry tube 40 minutes later wore Port Health yellow with the Tarsk caduceus on the chest, carried the standard cases, moved with the standard board efficiency, and Mara, who had now spent a day and a half being billed by the actual Tarsk Port Health office, stood at her inner lock door with her hand on the dog latch and did not open it because of gloves, doctor. Marin's gauntlets had been yellow with gray palms, port issue, scuffed to the weave at the fingertips by 1,000 sample vials. These gloves were yellow with white palms, new, unscuffed, wrong, and once one thing was wrong, the rest unraveled fast. Cases matte where Marin's had been scratched gloss, boots without a single scuff of gantry rust, and the taller assessor's suit hood sitting wrong at the shoulder bulked the way a hood sits over a hard-frame audio rig or a recoil harness, neither of which Port Health had any use for. Assessment team, Captain. The voice through the lock speaker was official smooth, young, rehearsed warmth on rust. She'd heard it before off her port quarter, 30 hours out. Open at your convenience. Convenience runs about 14 days right now, Mara said. Quarantine. You'd know. You wrote the flag rules. A pause. Captain, Port Health supersedes its own quarantine for assessment purposes. Open the lock. We have authority to, then you won't mind that I've got the actual Port Health duty desk on the other channel, Mara said pleasantly, keying it live so the duty clerk's puzzled voice. No supplemental team dispatch, ma'am. Who's at your berth? Spilled into the gantry tube speaker at volume, confirming that whoever you are, you're standing in a monitored tube on camera, wearing a forged caduceus, which on Tarsk is 2 years labor adjudication before we even get to impersonating health officers under a live bio flag, which is, she let herself enjoy 1 whole second of it, criminal endangerment of a depot. Port watch is 4 minutes out. Do give the open hand my best. Through the lock port, she watched the 2 yellow figures stand very still, calculating, and then the taller one's hood turned toward the tube camera and toward the sound of the duty clerk dispatching the watch, and they went fast, not panicked, professionally fast, peeling back down the gantry tube and dropping out of sight toward the Spur's small craft rack, and from the trunk corridor behind her, Tully exhaled like a pressure valve and said, "Gloves, gloves," Mara said. Her knees, now that it was done, mentioned that they were made of water. From the spine, 3 small gray faces were watching her from the cabin hatch they had absolutely been ordered to keep dogged, ears at 3 different angles of astonishment, and the littlest one's whole body was vibrating with something that, in any species at all, would be called the end of holding your breath. The first flinch had gone the other way for once. The hunters had run from them. Back in the cabin, Mara said, with no heat in it at all, and didn't bother hiding the grin. The watch took her statement by calm. The forged credential complaint went on record against persons unknown. The skiff Provident Errand had, the harbor master noted blandly, departed Tarsk space 20 minutes after the incident, and registered agents of the Dree Foundling sponsorship expressed shock at the misuse of their good name by criminal elements. By evening, the sponsorship's recovery bulletin on the Tarsk boards had been edited. The fee was $60,000 now. A new line had been added: wards may be in the custody of an unstable third party. That's you, Tully said, reading over her shoulder. You're an unstable third party. I'm a quarantined unstable third party, Mara said. It's got a ring to it. But she sat at the board a long time after he went aft, doing the thing she'd been refusing to do all day, which was look at it from the warm oil side. Dree had found them on the corridor spine 30 hours before Tarsk. Found them, not guessed. The intercept vector had been waiting. He'd had a forged credential team racked and ready at a depot she'd told no one she was making for. He'd bought a look at sealed medical records within a day of their filing. She was sure of that. The bulletin's new wording had a phrase in it. Fragile cargo, that made her cold. Charter fuel, forged seals, bought clerks $60,000 and climbing for 3 war orphans, of whom the galaxy made thousands a year. He doesn't like losing things, Ryan had said, with her ears coming up smooth. What did you take, kid? Mara said softly to the empty board. And how does he keep finding us? 2 berths down the dark spine of her ship, in the bunk nearest the wall, under a blanket, a small copper-rimmed light was glowing, the size of a coin, warm as a struck match. It pulsed twice, paused, pulsed twice, patient, faithful, the way it had pulsed every sleep shift for 19 days. And then a small gray hand covered it, and it slept. They cast off from Tarsk 31 hours later, quarantine commuted to a clean bill by Dr. Marin's final report, holds emptied by stevedore drones, tanks full, account bled white. The new contract was the best of a bad board. 40 containers of agricultural membrane for the Cetero yards, decent rate, brutal schedule, and a routing that took them up the old corridor through the Aldous Reach, long, empty, and unfashionable, which was the point. Nobody staged an interception on a route nobody could predict. She filed a different routing with the port, told the broker a third version, and burned for the Reach, telling nobody at all. 52 hours out of Tarsk, the long scan picked up a drive flare matching their course. 11 light minutes back, holding station in their wake like a polite shark. That's not possible, Mara said, flat to the plot. The kids were at the galley table aft, where she'd sent them. Tully was leaning over her shoulder, smelling of flux and tea. 3 routings, Tully. I filed 3 different lies and flew a 4th. Nobody followed us out. I watched the traffic shell for 6 hours. He'd need the nav computer itself. And the nav computer's clean, you stripped it at Tarsk. To the board traces, it's clean. Tully scratched his jaw. So it's not the computer. Then it's a beacon. Something's aboard squawking. She was already up, already pulling the sweep kit from its locker, the cold, methodical fury coming down over her like a visor. We stripped the ship. Every container's sealed external. Start with the spine and the lifeboat and everything that came aboard at Vey. She stopped. Said it anyway, because captains don't get to not say things. Everything and everyone. They turned the Kestrel's wage inside out for 9 hours. Tully ran the wideband sniffer up and down the spine while Mara crawled the holds with a hand rig, and the children, told what they were hunting and why, and gone very quiet, turned out their own small kit without being asked. Ryan's clothes and boots and precious knife, Seth's coil of practice line, the blanket, the spare blanket, the tin cup Nim had adopted. Nothing sang. The sniffer found the galley coil's leaky shielding and a corroded relay in hold 3, and, in the lifeboat, a fossil ping from a maintenance transponder 11 years dead, no beacon. Could be timing analysis, Tully offered finally without believing it. Could be he's got contacts at every depot watching departures. Could be luck. 11 light minutes of luck, twice. Mara stood in the spine corridor, filthy stymied, staring down the red-lit dark of her own ship, and made herself do the thing she did with stubborn cargo manifests. Stop looking at the entries and look at the spaces between them. They'd swept the ship. They'd swept what came aboard. The sniffer covered every band a tracker would use, a device built to be found by people who knew what trackers were, transmitting steady so a hunter could steer. But the flare in their wake wasn't steering in real time. It was correcting lazily, hours behind their turns. Like something that got a fix only now and then, like something that called home on a schedule. Tully, she said slowly. What pings twice at the start of every sleep shift? Silence on the spine. Then from the shadow of the cabin hatchway, where she had been standing for who knew how long with her tin cup held in both hands, Nim said, in a very small voice, "That's not a tracker." Mara turned. 11 kilos of child stood in the red light, ears down, not pinned in fear. Folded, drooping, an angle Mara hadn't catalogued yet. And behind her, Ryan was rising off the bunk with dawning horror rewriting her whole face. Because Reen was the smart one, Reen kept the accounts, and Reen had just run the same audit Mara had and reached the same entry. "Nim," Reen said. "Nim, what did you do?" What she had done, it came out, sitting on the bunk, with the thing cupped in her small gray hands, was keep a promise. It was a miner's tag. Yeveth made Habitat issue a disc of worn alloy the size of a coin with a thumb-shaped hollow polished into one face by a grown hand that had carried it for years before her. On the Varus ring, every shift worker wore one. It held a name, a bloodband code, a family frequency. When the ring cracked, the tags were how they sorted the living. When her father didn't come back from the dockside, his tag came back instead. A salvage crew brought it to the shelter level because that was the custom. The last courtesy of a place dying faster than its customs could. Papa said, Nim recited, in the careful voice of a child repeating a thing she has repeated to herself 10,000 times. In the dark under blankets, in the ballast spaces of condemned stations, if you're ever lost, light the tag and family will find you. Family always answers the band. Her thumb fit into the polished hollow. It didn't fill it. I light it when we sleep, so they know where we got to. So when they come, they don't miss us. The drooping ears came up a fraction, defiant for one heartbreaking second. Somebody's been answering. The last while, somebody pings back. Mara closed her eyes. Of course somebody pinged back. Somewhere behind them in the dark, 11 light minutes back and patient as interest, somebody had been answering a dead miner's family band for weeks. 2 pulses for hello, little one, the way a father would. The way a man who had collected hundreds of war orphans and learned every custom of every dying habitat would know exactly how a father would. Every night this child had lit her lamp for the dead and called the hunter down on them all and called it being found. Ryan made a sound, low, and lunged not at her sister, at the tag, and Mara caught her wrist a centimeter short. The older girl strained against her grip, ears flat, eyes blown wide and black-rimmed, speaking Yeveth now, fast, words like tearing cloth, and Nim folded around the tag with her whole body, wailing the wet double-noted wail of her kind, and Seth stood in the middle of it with his hands out, aimed between his sisters, the boy who could hear everything helpless in the one moment that mattered, and for 3 seconds the spare cabin of the Kestrel's wage held all the broken pieces of the Varus ring at once. Enough. Mara didn't shout it. She said it the way she said hard burn in 30 seconds, a fact of physics announced in advance, and the room stopped. She let go of Ryan's wrist. She knelt down, knees on cold deck plate, eye level, the way you got level with a thing to lift it, in front of Nim, and held out her open hand, and waited. He answers, Nim whispered. Somebody answers. I know, Mara said. I know who does. And you know too, don't you? You've known a little while. The copper-rimmed eyes came up, swimming, membranes half-drawn. The small body shook, and the truth Mara had already understood arrived anyway, in pieces because the child had carried it alone as long as she could. The pings come back too fast now. Papa's people were rimside. It should take, Ryan taught me the light math. It should take days, it takes hours. A hitching breath. I kept lighting it anyway. I thought, maybe if it isn't them, it's somebody who knew them. Maybe anybody. Maybe anybody's family is better than. And she couldn't finish it, and didn't have to, because every soul in that cabin could complete the arithmetic. Better than nobody. Better than being 3 entries on a charity's other ledger, with no band left in the universe that would ever answer. Rin sat down on the deck like her strings were cut. Mara stayed kneeling, hand out, and did not rush, and eventually the tag was placed, not surrendered. Placed with ceremony, the way you transfer a thing of weight, into her palm. It was warm from small hands. It weighed nothing. It weighed more than her ship. Here's what I'm not going to do, Mara said. I'm not going to crush it, and I'm not going to space it, and I'm not going to tell you to forget your father's band. Because the day somebody tells you, that is the day you start forgetting him. And on my ship, we don't pay that price for safety. Hear me? 2 small nods, one stricken stillness from the deck where Ryan sat. Here's what we are going to do. Tully and I are going to rewire it. The light stays. The listening stays. If anyone out there ever truly calls your band, this tag will hear it and you'll know. But it doesn't talk anymore. It doesn't tell the dark where you sleep. She closed the small gray fingers back around the disc with both of her scarred brown hands. And the sentence she finished with surprised her, arriving from somewhere below the ledgers, already true before she could check the math on it. You don't have to light a lamp for family, Nim. Family's already aboard. Later, kids down, tag rewired on the engine room bench under Tully's magnifiers, receive only. Its little pulse turned inward like a banked coal. Mara stood the dead watch alone and watched the flare in their wake sails serenely on down a course line that no longer led to anything, correcting, hours stale, toward where they would have been. By morning it had fallen off the long scan entirely, hunting the ghost of 2 pulses that would never come again, and she allowed herself exactly 1 mug of the good coffee in celebration. And that was, of course, when the next blow landed, because Mockle Dree had never been relying on the tag alone. It came in over the registry channel, official, stamped, beautiful, notice of assignment of secured interest. The Halloran Port Combine, in consideration of payment in full plus premium, hereby assigns all right, title, and interest in mortgage instrument 7741K vessel. Kestrel's wage to Provident Holdings Trust. All terms convey. Mortgagor is advised that the assignee has exercised its review clause. Collateral and account to be presented for full audit and cure of any deficiency at the assignee's designated registry office, etc., within 200 hours of this notice. Failure to present or any uncured deficiency shall constitute default. The assignee thanks the mortgagor for her custom and looks forward to a productive relationship. Be boring, Garrick had told her. Boring paper doesn't sell. Her paper had been sold before he'd even said it. The buyers asking after corridor liens had been one buyer with one open blue and white hand, and he had paid over book for the privilege of becoming the man she owed everything to. The trap was so clean she could admire it from inside. He didn't have to chase the ship anymore. He owned the ship. Every burn she made now, she made toward him or into default. Cetero, her own contracted destination, 40 containers of agricultural membrane, no way to divert without breach and breach, was default too, was his ground, his chosen office, his 200 hours running down in the corner of her board like a fuse. Attached to the formal notice, riding its coattails through the registry relay where no harassment complaint could touch it, was a personal message. Voice only, warm oil. Captain Quint, now that we're in business together properly, I find I regret our rough start, and I'll make you the offer I should have led with. Your note is 190,000 scrip, give or take the day's interest. Bring my 3 wards to the Cetero office. Walk them up the ramp yourself, no tricks. 1 hour of your time, and I will mark the instrument satisfied in full and assign you clean title to your ship. Paid off, Captain. Done. Yours. Free lien on it, 11 months early, for 1 hour's honesty about what those children actually are, which, and I say this with affection for them, is not yours. A pause, precisely measured, alternatively, present for audit in 200 hours, and we'll see what deficiencies turn up. I'm told I'm very thorough. Either way, I look forward to Cetero. Bring the little one's tag. I find I've grown fond of our correspondence. The message ended. The galley hummed. Tully, who had come up the trunk somewhere in the middle of it and heard the rest leaning in the hatchway with his arms folded, was quiet for a long moment and then said, in the flat, reasonable voice he used for reactor numbers and other things that didn't care how you felt about them, you know I have to say it. Say it then. It's the ship, Mara. He didn't move from the hatchway. Free and clear, 11 months early. Your old man flew 19 years and died owing. You'd walk off the Cetero ramp owning your own deck at 27. Against that, 3 kids we've known 26 days, who lied about where they're going, lied about what they're running from. Good kids. I'll grant it. I'd grant more than that. But you didn't make them. You didn't lose them. You found them behind a tank. And there's a man at Cetero holding paper on everything your family ever built, offering to tear it up. He let it sit, the whole weight of it, the argument she'd been having with herself since the bulletin at 4 in the morning, now standing in her hatchway wearing her oldest friend's face. Somebody aboard has to be the one to say it out loud, so it's been said. That's the trade on the table, the ship for the kids. And if it were you holding the paper, Mara said, would you take that trade? Not in 1,000 years, Tully said, without a heartbeat's pause. But I'm not the captain and it's not my ship. And you needed to hear the whole of it from somebody who loves you before you hear any piece of it from him. He unfolded his arms, and his voice stayed level, and his eyes were terrible and kind. So, Captain, what are we doing? What they were doing, what Mara discovered she had apparently decided sometime between a knife at her ribs and a tag in her palm, because the decision was simply there when she reached for it, load-bearing, already holding weight, was reading the trap again, slower. He overpaid for thin paper, she said. Premium over book, plus charter fuel since Vay, plus forged credentials, plus bought clerks, plus a 60,000 scrip public fee he never intends to pay. Against the going rate for war orphans, which is nothing, the corridors are full of them, he can sponsor a dozen tomorrow with a chapel reading thrown in. Tully, the man has spent over 250,000 scrip recovering assets he could replace for the cost of the paperwork. She tapped the dead message queue. And then he offers to forgive a 190,000 scrip note, to pay functionally the price of my whole ship for 1 hour and 3 children. Nobody spends like that to get wards back. Nobody spends like that to make an example. He's not buying children. He's buying back something one of them is carrying or knows, or is, something worth more than the total of everything he's burned, and he has to do it quietly, through fronts and charities and bought paper, because if he could do it loudly, he'd have done it at Vay with port enforcement and a custody writ. She turned. The galley hatch stood open on the spine corridor, and in it where she had materialized soundless, somewhere around the words, what those children actually are, stood Rin, composure smooth, hands quiet at her sides, every line of her arranged into the negotiator's calm that Mara now knew to read like a flare on a scope. And Mara understood that the question she'd parked 26 days ago in this same galley had just come due, with interest. "It's time, kid," Mara said not unkindly. "What did you take from him?" And Rin, who paid her accounts, who was not a thief, who had carried it sewn into the lining of her coat through 3 ports, 1 quarantine, and every sweep of the ship, because a child who'd spent 2 years running contraband for the open hand knew exactly how to make small things, invisible to honest people, reached into that lining and laid on the galley table between the salt tin and Mara's cooling mug a courier's bond seal, a black hexagonal slug of registry composite, heavy out of all proportion to its size, its faces etched with interlocking guild ciphers and 1 live status bead burning a steady amber, the kind of object that moved between banks under armed escort, the kind of object that was, in every port in settled space, worth precisely whatever was waiting inside the container it opened. "I didn't steal it," Reen said, and her voice was very steady, and her ears, for once, did not lie at all. "I'm the manifest. He made me the manifest." And then he was going to settle the account. They sat her down with hot water in the good mug, and she told it in order, dates first. Like the clerk she'd been raised into, and the order was its own kind of horror, because it meant she'd had it organized like this in her head for months, filed and cross-referenced, with nobody to read it to. A bond seal, she explained, was how value moved when nobody trusted anybody. The container sat in a registered bonded yard, sealed by the Freight Guild. The seal slug was its only key. And the slug was bearer imprinted. The first living hand to hold it naked, flesh on composite, became the bearer, logged in the slug's own lattice, and the yard would crack the container for no one else. Banks used vault couriers. Syndicates used cutouts. The whole art of moving stolen value was the art of choosing whose hand. 8 months ago, a client came to the hand, Ryan said. Not to the charity side, the other side. A woman called Mar, Otla Mar. She buys for the Korriban, the syndicate that runs gray freight through the Cetero yards. There'd been a hijacking half a year before that, a Meridian Relief Compact convoy, inbound for the Yevath resettlement worlds. 3 ships. The escort was bought off and the cargo vanished, and the boards all said it was never recovered. Her thumb moved, absently, along the table edge. It was recovered fine, by the people who took it. 40 containers went to auction in pieces, but the best one, the cold chain container, the medical freight that was too hot to move whole and too rich to break up. Surgical cultures, graft tissue stock, regenerative lines, the real compact tier stock the kind clinics wait a year for. She did not look at Sif when she said it. She looked very deliberately at nothing, which was worse. 2 million scrip wholesale, more on the relief black market, sitting in Cetero's bonded yard under a guild seal, and the Korriban needed it claimable by a hand that could never ever be traced to them. Not an employee. Not a hired courier. Couriers get audited. Couriers have records. Couriers can testify. A ward, Mara said. The word came out with rust on it. A ward of a decorated charity. Ryan's recitation didn't waver. No records anywhere, no legal existence to subpoena. A hand nobody would believe and nobody would miss. He held a chapel reading, and then he took me into the back office, and he put the slug in my hand himself, bare, first touch. Witnessed by the client's agent, and he told me I was doing a great service for the hand, and that I was the manifest now, so I had to learn the inventory by heart, because nothing could be written down. 41 crates. I can say them in order. He had me recite it every drop day for 2 months, like scripture. Her ears moved then, finally, flattening by slow degrees as the telling came up on the part she'd been carrying alone. The delivery was set for the season. Cetero. I'd walk into the yard with his agent, my hand would open the container, the Korriban would take their freight, and then she stopped. The galley hummed. Tully had gone very still in the hatchway, and Seth's face was aimed at his sister with an expression Mara couldn't read. And Nim was watching Mara, copper-rimmed and unblinking, the way she'd watched her since the water tank, like a creature keeping its eye on the one fixed point in a turning room. The bearer imprint doesn't die when the container opens, Rin said. It stays in the slug, and the slug goes back to the guild. And the guild lattice keeps the print on file for the life of the instrument, which means for the life of the instrument, there's a recorded hand connecting the Korriban's freight to the hand's office, unless. The word sat there, accountant clean. Unless the print can't ever be matched to anyone, because the bearer isn't anyone, was never registered anywhere, and stopped existing shortly after delivery. I heard them settle it. I was in the conduit over the back office. I was always in the conduit, small spaces. It's what we're for. And Mar's agent asked what closes the loop on the imprint, and he said in his chapel voice, the same voice he says the reading's in, the hand settles its accounts. The instrument will be orphaned. And the agent laughed and said that's fitting, and they moved on to the freight schedule. 2 sentences. She looked up at Mara for the first time since she'd started, and under the clerk's calm the child was suddenly entirely visible, the way deck plate shows through worn paint. I ran the same night. I took the slug because I'm the slug. Leaving it would have changed nothing about what I am, except where it happens. I took Seth and Nim because the wards who know a runner get questioned, and Seth knew, and Nim follows Seth a beat. I told them there's a place at Lostwick that takes us in. There's no place at Lostwick. There's nothing at Lostwick. I needed a word that sounded like a place, and the littles needed somewhere to be walking to. You can't walk small children to nowhere. They stop moving. So I lied. I've been lying to everyone the whole way about everything. Her ears came up, smooth, composed, by force of will alone. But not stealing, he made me the manifest. A manifest can't steal itself. Nobody spoke. Then Seth said quietly to the middle distance, I knew about Lostwick, and Nim said, small but stubborn, I mostly knew, and Rhine made a sound that was trying to be a laugh and didn't survive the attempt, and put her face in her hands, and sat there shaking, not crying. Yeveth's grief was drier and worse, a fine fast tremor like a hull at redline, while her brother found her, shoulder on the first try by ear. Mara picked up the seal. It was heavy and warm and entirely indifferent. 2,000,000 scrip of stolen mercy compressed into a slug the size of a ration biscuit, and she stood there feeling the exact shape of the temptation arrive, fitted to her like a tailored coat, because Michael Dree had read her right from the first transmission and she knew it. Here was the ship debt, in her palm. Here was the graft course. Here was every number that ran her life, solved, and all the solution required was a clean handoff to a man who would then have no further claim on anyone, surely, a man who'd marked the paper paid in full once already, a man whose word was warm oil over a settled account. She could feel how a person got there. The walls of that road were so smooth and the grade so gentle, and at the end of it 3 gray faces watched you walk up a ramp, and one of them was a manifest, and manifests get orphaned, and you'd own your deck free and clear knowing to the day how it was paid for. Okay, she said, and put the slug down on the table like it was nothing, like it was a salt tin, and watched 3 sets of pinned ears register that the captain had just set down 2,000,000 script to keep her hands free. New facts. He doesn't want you, plural, he wants the seal and the bearer, which is Reen's hand and Reen's silence, and his client's freight schedule means he's against a deadline that's real even if his charm isn't. That's why the spending. That's why the bought paper. He's not hunting orphans. He's hunting his own loose end before the Korriban decides he is one. She looked at Tully, which makes him exactly as dangerous as a man with no good exits, and it gives us the one thing we haven't had since Vey, which is something he needs that can't be taken. Mara tapped the slug once. It can only be walked in alive by her. Every plan he's got dies without Rhine breathing and cooperating at a bonded yard gate. Gentlemen, she said, which was what she called all 4 of them now. A galley table habit 3 weeks old that none of them had remarked on and all of them had noticed. For the first time in this whole ugly run, we are not the ones out of time. The clean play they built that night, and it was good, and Mara would spend a long while afterward going over exactly how good it had been, the way you check sound rigging after a load shifts anyway. They would not run for Lostwick or any other nowhere. They would keep the contract, keep the schedule, fly for Cetero like the boring paper Garrick had begged her to be, and ahead of the deadline, at a public waypoint of her choosing, she would offer Dree a transaction instead of a war. The hauling shoal buoy, 4 hours short of Cetero control space, a traffic-monitored stretch, ships passing in dozens, no quiet corners. The seal, delivered by drone tether, alone, no bearer, no children anywhere in the exchange, against the mortgage instrument marked satisfied and won. Recorded undertaking to dissolve all interest in 3 former wards. He wouldn't honor the undertaking, Mara assumed. The point of the seal wasn't to buy his honesty, but to buy distance, because a slug without its bearer was a problem he'd have to solve with the guild, slowly, lawyer by bribed lawyer, and every hour he spent solving it was an hour the Kestrel's wage spent getting 3 children registered, documented, lawyered, and witnessed into existence, Marin's medical records, the port watch complaint at Tarsk, a compact relief filing at Cetero's own desk, until orphaning the instrument meant erasing a paper trail with her name and a dozen officials, stamps all over it. Make the loose end expensive. Make silence cost more than the freight. It was leverage math, honest leverage math, and Mara was good at it, and it had exactly one flaw, which Tully put his finger on at the dead end of the planning watch. Last thing, frowning at the plot. It only works if he's still thinking in script. Dree's answer to the waypoint proposal came back in 9 minutes, agreeable, warm, almost relieved. A transaction. Captain, you have no idea how I've missed dealing with a professional. And at the hauling shoal buoy, at the appointed hour, with the traffic lanes streaming past like indifferent rivers and her drone tether spooled, and the slug in its case at the airlock, The Kestrel's wage dropped out of corridor, burn into the one place in 4 light years she had told Malkoldri she would be, and his answer was already waiting in the shoal's sensor shadow. And it was not a transaction, it was a tug. An industrial heavy grapple tug, anonymous as a hammer squatting dark in the buoy's scatterclutter with its transponder cold, illegal 16 ways, invisible until it lit. And it lit at 400 meters with its grapple field already hot and took the Kestrel's wage by the spine the way a hawk takes a pigeon. The hit rang the hull stem to stern. Acceleration slewed sideways. The deck heaved. Loose gear went everywhere, and the children went into crash couches because 3 weeks of Mara's drills had built that reflex into them, and Mara rode the pilot's chair through the wrenching yaw with her teeth bared, burning attitude thrusters against 6 times her torque budget and losing. The comm lit, warm oil, and underneath it, for the first time, the thing the oil had always floated on, something cold and bored and in a hurry. Hold still, Captain. The tug's rated for ore barges. You'll only hurt your frames. Here's the amended transaction. I'm taking the seal from your airlock, and I'm taking my eldest ward off your ship, and in exchange, I'm not going to open your hull to vacuum with 3 children aboard, which the recovery bulletin will note an unstable third party tragically did herself. You were proofing them into witnesses. Yes, I read the compact filing draft. You really must stop trusting port relays. So we'll be skipping the rest of the courtship. Lock your crew in the galley, dog the spine hatches, and put the manifest in a suit. Tully was already moving, not to the galley, down the trunk toward the drive room. With a look on his face Mara had seen exactly twice in 3 years, and both times something expensive had happened. And Mara kept talking, agreeing, bargaining details, her voice doing professional while her hands flew, because the tug's grapple had her spine but her drive was live, and there is a maneuver every freight pilot knows and none is supposed to use, the one where you stop fighting the grapple's pull and slam your full mass with it, into it, inside its correction loop. Tully, on my mark. Everything. Mara the frames, he's rated for barges. Barges don't kick. Mark. The Kestrel's wage lit her main drive into the grapple's own vector and kicked like her namesake stooping, and 80 meters of freighter became 4,000 tons of slingshot. The tug's field, built to drag dead mass, tried to correct for live mass accelerating through its grip, overdrove its compensators, and had to let go or shear its own emitters. And the Kestrel snapped free on a tumble that grayed Mara's vision at the edges and threw the ship down and across the shoal's clutter with the tug's roar behind her, and Dree's voice gone from the comm because he was busy, suddenly, with the second thing. The second thing was that Tully had fired the drone tether anyway. The spooled exchange drone, slug case attached, programmed hours ago for a gentle handoff, except the case he'd clamped to it in the last 90 seconds was the wrong case, the decoy they'd built and hoped not to need, and it was transmitting the slug's parasite band signature at full gain as it shot off through the shoal on the original handoff vector. Half of Dree's sensor picture said his prize was tumbling away sunward at 9 Gs. All of him had to choose. He chose wrong by 40 seconds, and 40 seconds was the corridor mouth. And the Kestrel's wage went through it at a fuel burn that made Mara's ledger soul scream. With her frames groaning, her spine grapple scared, her schedule dead, her decoy spent, her enemy undeceived for anything longer than one breakaway, and her whole crew alive, unboarded, and untaken. They ran silent for 6 hours before anyone said anything that wasn't operational. Then Mara unstrapped, walked aft past the galley where 3 children were watching her come with 6 wide amber eyes, put her hand briefly on each gray head in passing, once, twice, 3 times, like counting stock, like a benediction, whichever, and went down the trunk to where Tully hung in the drive room webbing with bruised ribs and a beatific expression, and said, "The frames held. Course they held." He closed his eyes. "I maintained this ship for a lunatic. I planned for kicks. But the math, when she finally sat down with it in the dead watch, was as bad as math had ever been. The seal was still aboard, the one thing saved. Everything else was gone or burning. The deadline now 104 hours, the audit waiting, etc., with a man who'd stopped pretending, the contract penalty mounting, the fuel margin a memory, and no second decoy, no second kick, no clean play left at all. He had been willing to crack her hull at a public buoy. At Cetero, in his own office, with her note in his desk and the wardens in his pocket, and they would be. A man who bought clerks bought wardens. There would be no transaction at all. Just the trap, sprung at leisure, on a schedule she was contractually obligated to fly into. Mara sat in the red-lit galley of her groaning, debt-strangled, grapple-scared ship, 3 sleeping children and 1 snoring engineer down the spine behind her, and stared at the amber bead on the bond seal until the watch clock had eaten an hour she couldn't spare. And then she stopped thinking like prey, stopped thinking like a debtor, and started thinking like what she actually was, which was a freight captain, Somebody whose entire profession was getting valuable cargo through hostile space to a hard deadline against people, paid to stop it. And freight captains did not avoid the destination port. They arrived early, with the manifest in order, and let the receiving party discover the cargo was already theirs. She laid it out for all of them in the galley at first watch, because the plan needed every hand aboard and because she was done, permanently, with a kind of protecting that worked by keeping people ignorant. She drew the Cetero system on the table screen with her finger. The planet, the port ring, the bonded yards on the ring's trailing edge, and out at the approaches, drawn in slow gray hatching, the broad drifting lattice of the combs. Cetero built warships once, she said. The old yard ring. It got scuttled in the war rather than surrendered. They blew its spine and let it spread. 40 kilometers of frames, cradles, dead hulls, and cable, all of it still in its parking orbit, all of it charted exactly nowhere. Corridor traffic goes around. Tugs go around. Everything goes around except salvage rats and freight captains running late because the comb sits square across the cheap approach and threading them saves 11 hours. She tapped the hatching. I've flown them 6 times. My father flew them 100. It's the only piece of space in this system where what I do matters more than what anybody paid for. And the audit? Tully said. The deadline? We make the deadline. That's the spine of the whole thing. We do nothing he can call default. We present at Cetero inside his 200 hours with the cargo contract fulfilled and the account current because the trap he built only springs if we flinch from it, but we arrive our way, early, loud, and through the combs, and before we ever touch his registry office, we go to the one counter on that ring he can't buy. She looked at Rin. The Freight Guild. The yard answers to the guild, not the port wardens. The seal is guild instrument, the imprint is guild record, and guild's kid do not forgive people who counterfeit their paper or murder their bearers, not out of decency, out of business. A bond seal is only worth what the guild's word is worth. The day a bearer dies conveniently, every seal in the corridor gets repriced, and they know it. The guild doesn't love you. Better, it needs you alive on principle. Ryan was very still, ears at a careful neutral, eyes running the angles the way Mara's ran freight rates. You want me to walk into the bonded yard and claim it as the bearer, myself, with a guild escort booked from the approach buoy, a Meridian Compact relief agent standing at the gate. I pulled the duty roster. There's a compact resident inspector on Cetero Ring. There has to be. It's a resettlement corridor. And every camera on the trailing edge live. Mara spread her hand flat on the table. 41 crates of stolen relief medicine come out of that container in front of the people it was stolen from, off the back of your memorized manifest, and in that 1 hour, everything inverts. The freight stops being his asset and becomes his indictment. The imprint stops being your death warrant and becomes your protection. The guild's bearer of record in a recovery case, the compact's witness, a name in so many official files that orphaning the instrument would take a war. He spent $250,000 script keeping you a secret. She turned her hand over open. So we spend one morning making you the most documented Yevath child in the system. Secrets die in daylight, Rin. We're going to drown him in it. There was a silence with a particular texture to it, and into that silence, Nim, chin barely clearing the table edge, tin cup in both hands, said, He'll come before the daylight part, in the matter-of-fact register of a child who has been hunted across 4 systems and keeps the schedule in. Her head. He always comes at the moving part, when everyone's between doors. Yes, Mara said, simply, because lying to them was over too. He'll come at the approach, before port control space, before the guild buoy. He's got nothing left but stopping us short. And he knows this system, and he'll have hired what there is to hire in it. So the moving part is where we beat him, in the combs, on my water. She let herself look at each of them in turn, the negotiator and the line splicer and the lamplighter, 3 creatures the open hand had spent years teaching their own smallness, and gave them the rest of it straight. And if any part goes wrong, his people may board this ship looking for you. So between now and Cetero, all 4 of you are going to teach me every hiding trick the hand ever drilled into you, every duct logic, every searcher habit, every way a small body reads a big ship. Because if they board, they're going to search the Kestrel's wage for children. She said it with a freight captain's cold relish. The first smile of that whole hard watch going around the table like a lit fuse, and I intend for this ship to be the worst place in settled space to look for one. What the children knew about hiding could have filled a manual no honest publisher would print. They knew searchers came in pairs and trusted upward sightlines least. That armored men hated crawl spaces not from fear but from pride, and would send sensors where they wouldn't send their own knees. That a sensor sweep reads heat, gas, and motion, and that the counter to all 3 was patience and pre-chilled metal and the kind of stillness Yeveth children learned before they learned numbers. Seth walked the spine with his fingertips trailing the conduits and identified every space aboard where the hull's own systems sang loud enough to smother a heartbeat from a wand. Ryan mapped the holds into search sectors the way a runner boss's clerk would, then marked where each sector's sweep would start, stall, and get careless. Nim, with the deadly authority of the smallest, crawled routes through the Kestrel's service ways that her siblings couldn't follow, and Tully flatly refused to believe were passable until she emerged dusty and smug from a vent above his own workbench. And Mara and Tully built the rest. The ship's maintenance crawler, a flat scuttling thing the size of a toolbox that walked the ducks on magnet feet, refitted to carry Nim's rewired tag with its transmitter switched live again, throttled low, a heartbeat in a box that could be sent wandering anywhere in the hull, deck plating keyed to magnetize in sections from the drive room board, the cargo handling exoframe and hold 2, charged and parked in shadow, the armored cold locker behind the drive room rated for vacuum, fire, and the failure of every other compartment, provisioned, warmed, and fitted inside with a hatch release no one outside could override. The Citadel, the one non-negotiable. When boarding came, the children went in it and stayed in it, no matter what they heard through the hull. "Promise me," Mara said, "crouch at the locker hatch, eye level, whatever you hear, even my voice asking. Especially my voice asking, because if my voice asks you to open that hatch, somebody's standing behind me, and the only way you can protect me is to make me a liar." 3 small hands came out, palms up, fingers spread. The Yevath gesture for witness to count, the one Rin used closing a ledger, and Mara laid her scarred brown hand over all 3, and the contract was signed. They hit the Ceteros system at the cheap approach 41 hours ahead of Dree's deadline, transponder honest, course filed true, 40 containers of agricultural membrane riding her spine racks like a clear conscience, and the intercept came exactly where Nim had priced it, at the moving part, 20 minutes short of the combs. It rose off the lattice's sunward shadow where it had been lying cold among the dead frames. A cutter, military surplus, lean and overpowered, the kind of hull that outran customs for a living, its transponder squawking a salvage license that was probably real and certainly irrelevant. It didn't hail. It put a ranging pulse across the Kestrel's bow, the corridor's oldest sentence, heave to or be made to, and lit a pursuit burn that closed the gap like a door slamming. "There he is," Tully said softly at his board. The skiff-provident errand hung far back, prim and patient, with one heavy launch on its rack. The cutter was the dog. The skiff was the man with the leash, staying clean. "Stand by the racks," Mara said, and took her ship into the combs at a speed her father would have taken his belt to. The wreck ring swallowed them. 40 kilometers of murdered industry tumbled past the viewports in slow procession, keel frames like whale ribs, drive cradles fouled in their own severed cabling, a half-built warship's bow section forever aimed at a launch it never got, and Mara flew the lattice the way it could only be flown, not around the debris but with it, riding the gaps that opened and closed on the ring's own lazy rotation, her hands light, her burn ragged on purpose, leaving exactly the kind of wake a panicking freighter would leave. The cutter came in after her, faster, surer, closing, a pilot good enough to know he was better than her, which was the whole bet, because better is a story pilots tell themselves about open space, and the combs were not open space, and the Kestrel's wage knew something the cutter didn't, which was every cable. "Seth," Mara said, conversational, eyes everywhere. "That bow section coming up trailing side. What do you hear?" He was strapped in the jump seat behind her. They all were. The Citadel was for boarding, not for burns. With his head tilted, reading the rumble of the wreck field's micro-debris on the hull like print. "It's ringing," he said, long and low. "It's still tied to something heavy." "Anchor cable," Mara agreed. 4 of them, yard grade, holding that bow to its cradle since before I was born. Invisible at speed against the frame clutter. She keyed the rack release to her stick hand, and her voice went to that place it went. The hard-burn place, fact of physics calm. "Tully, on my mark, drop racks 7 through 40. All of them. The contract. Containers have beacons and the membrane bounces. Salvageable, every crate, and I'll claim the recovery myself. Mark." The Kestrel's wage shed 34 cargo containers in 3 seconds, a blooming, tumbling screen of house-sized boxes spreading on her wake vector straight down the cutter's closing line. Not a wall. You couldn't build a wall in space, but a question, 34 simultaneous questions, arriving at a pilot already flying the lattice at the edge of his loop, and the cutter answered the way Mara had bet a better pilot would, brilliantly. It threaded them. It rolled and jinked and split the tumbling boxes with contemptuous beautiful precision, came out of the screen still accelerating, still locked on her drive flare, and crossed, carrying every gram of that speed, with its sensor picture still wiped white by 34 container transponders screaming clutter, into the shadow of the dead warship's bow, where 4-yard grade anchor cables had waited 40 years, patient as unpaid debt. It caught the third one amidships. There was no sound, because there never is. Just the cutter's clean, lean shape folding around an invisible line like a racing dog hitting a fence, the spine shearing, the drive section tumbling free on a cartwheel of venting fuel, the cockpit module, and Mara watched for this, throat tight, because there are lines she didn't cross even now, blowing its panels and ejecting clear beacon wailing, crew pods scattering like seeds. Alive. Wrecked, ruined, finished, and alive. Salvage claim on a military surplus cutter, Tully said into the ringing quiet, in the voice of a man reading a number off a dream. Hull, drives, and fittings. That's Mara. That's 6 figures. That's notes. Log the claim, timestamp it, squirt it to the guild buoy. Mara was already rolling the kestrel out of the lattice's trailing edge, already watching the one thing still moving on her scope. And then everybody breathe out, because here comes the leash. The Provident Aaron had not run. It was coming up the Combs exit corridor at a sober, unhurried burn, its heavy launch already detached and accelerating, and the comm was already live with the last voice in the world still pretending this was business. Captain Quint, that was an expensive thing you just did to a salvage contractor engaged in lawful operations. We're coming alongside to render assistance and inspect for debris damage. Port code gives any vessel the right to insist after a collision event. Your transponder says you won't refuse. A pause, the oil thinning over the cold. 12 men, Captain. Your move was the containers. And it was a good one, and it's spent. I've bought your paper, your port, and your time. You have one hull left, and I am going to walk through it. Mara looked at the launch's closing vector, at her own scarred spine racks. At the deck of the ship, her father had died flying, and her grandmother had welded her first seam on, and felt the strange, total calm of a plan arriving at its load-bearing hour. Kestrel's wage receives and complies, she said, sweet as a settled invoice. Ventral lock. Mind the step. Then she cut the channel, turned in her chair, and looked at her crew, the engineer already rolling his sleeves. The 3 children already unstrapping, gray faces set, ears flat and steady as battle flags. Citadel, she said. Gentlemen, it's their turn to be searched. The launch hard docked at the ventral lock with a clang like a dropped anvil, and 12 of them came up into hold one in boarding rigs. Hard-shell torso armor over worksuits, sensor wands, shock batons. 2 with stubby riot guns they handled like men who'd been told this was a children's errand. Malcolm came last, and the first true sight of him was almost disappointing. A tall, neat, middle-aged Sasuri in a charcoal coat, mild-faced, silvering at the temples, the blue and white open hand pinned at his collar like a small good deed. He looked like a man who endowed libraries. He stepped over the lock combing into Mara's hold, breathed her air with appreciation, and smiled at her where she stood alone and empty-handed on the gantry stairs. Captain, at last, he said it warmly. Where are my children? Saul's aboard too, Mara said. Me and my engineer. You're welcome to verify that against the port crew manifest that I filed at the approach buoy an hour ago. Oh, we will. He nodded, and the 12 fanned out into her ship with the unhurried confidence of professionals holding all the cards. And the search began, and the Kestrel's wage, 80 meters of bonded hull that 3 small gokes had spent 4 days teaching to lie, began, with great patience, to eat them. It started with nothing anyone could point to. A sensor wand in hold 2 read a faint heartbeat in the port side ducting. The pair sent to trace it followed it aft, then forward, then aft again, the signal strolling through the walls at the exact pace of a walking child, always one junction ahead, while 40 meters away a toolbox-sized crawler walked the duct on magnet feet with a rewired miner's tag riding its back, throttled to the pulse of a small sleeping heart. The pair split up to bracket it, which the hands-on doctrine said never to do, because doctrine is what leaves a man's head first when the prey is supposed to be 11 kilos of frightened orphan, and the one who went up the maintenance shaft to cut ahead of the signal, found the rungs above him slicked with sprayed sealant release, lost his gauntlet purchase, slid 4 meters back down the shaft onto the magnetized deck plate, Tully lit under him at quarter charge, and stuck there, armor to deck, like a fly on tape, his comm filling with his own swearing. In the spine corridor, the lights went out section by section, not all at once. That would have read as tactics, but raggedly, flickering, the way a grapple-scared ship's lighting honestly fails. So the searchers wrote it off as damage, and bunched up and slowed, and lit their helmet lamps, which told everyone watching from the dark exactly where every one of them stood at all times. Seth had mapped the blind music of the hull for them, which frames roared with recycler harmonics, which deck sections carried bootfall like a drum, which didn't. The boarder's own sensor net, set to flag motion and heat, flagged instead the galley coil cycling, the water tank's convection, a maintenance crawler, the ship breathing, flagged so much honest nothing so steadily that within 40 minutes the operators were swiping alerts away unread, which was the point and always had been. You couldn't make a ship invisible. The children knew better. You made it boring, and then you owned every eye that had stopped looking. Two men searched hold 4, where the aft water tank stood with its access panel hanging on one good hinge, pried open recently conspicuously, bedding visible inside, a tin cup, a child's blanket still holding the shape of a small body, the hide found. The story every searcher wants to find. They were here. They bolted when the docking rang the hull. They're loose in the ship ahead of us. The pair called it in, peeled deeper aft on the obvious flight line, and the obvious flight line took them through the foam-flooded crawlway junction, non-toxic, non-flammable, packing-grade expansion foam, the stuff every freighter carries in drums, triggered from the drive room into a corridor neck at the moment their own momentum carried them into it. And what came out of that junction 5 minutes later was 2 riot guns and 2 men so cocooned in cured amber resin that Tully, watching on the duct camera, laughed until he had to sit down on a toolbox. By the second hour, the searchers were down to 8 effective, scattered, sweating inside their shells, talking over each other on a comm channel that had started crisp and was now a low mutiny of static dead ends and "Where's Tovesh? Has anyone got eyes on Tovesh?" And that was when Mara began taking them. She did it in the dark in the cargo handling exoframe, which was not a weapon and had never needed to be one. 4 meters of yellow-painted industrial lifting rig rated to walk 2 tons up a loading ramp, moving through her own pitch-black, holds on routes she'd walked since she was 9. The frame's grab arms took the first man from behind a container stack, took him the way it took crates, firm, total, indifferent to wriggling, and zip-strapped him to a cargo ring with the strap band Seth had pre-cut to length, neat as a splice. The second she simply herded, lightless, with the frame's proximity horn and 2 tons of footsteps, into Hold 3's empty livestock pod, and dogged the hatch. The third, one of the riot guns, got the ship's fire suppression system discharged over his position on Tully's mark, blinding, freezing, harmless, and was on his knees wiping his faceplate when the frame's shadow fell over him. And he looked up at 4 meters of yellow machine with a freight captain's voice coming out of it, saying, with terrible courtesy, "Set it down." And he set it down. And then the night's whole architecture nearly came down because of the one man aboard who was actually good at his work. His name, the comm chatter said, was Brasson, the young lieutenant from the Provident errand, the rehearsed warmth voice that had asked permission to come alongside a lifetime ago off Tarsk. And somewhere in the third hour, while his squad dissolved around him into resin and strap band and dogged hatches, Brasson stopped. Mara watched him do it on the duct camera. Stood still in the spine corridor, helmet lamp off for 2 full minutes, doing the one thing no one else aboard his side had done all night, which was think. Then he keyed his channel and said, quite calmly, "Everyone stop moving, stop chasing the heartbeat. It's a lure. It's been a lure for 3 hours. Nobody hides children and ducks on a ship like this. Ducks are where you put the noise." His lamp came back on, aimed aft. "You put children behind the thickest bulkhead you own, with its own air, near your own strength. They're in the drive section. They're in something rated. Keith, bring the cutter. Everyone else, hold the spine and stop touching things." "Tully," Mara said, already moving. "Where's my frame?" "Hold 2 where you left it, Mara. He's 4 sections aft of you and the frame walks at a crawl." She ran. Behind her in the dark, her exoframe stood plugged into its charge cradle, 2 tons of useless yellow patience, and ahead of her, on the duct feed in her wrist display, 2 armored men came down the drive room companionway to the Citadel hatch, and the one called Gath unshipped a plasma cutter and lit it. Inside the cold locker, 3 children heard the hull start to sing. It was a high note first, where the cutting torch kissed the outer hinge, then a falling, grinding tone as it bit. Seth would describe it all later, precisely the way he described everything. The locker's rated wall carrying the sound into their bones like a struck tuning fork, and Nim's hand went to the inner release lever, because outside that wall was Mara's ship with Mara somewhere on it, and her whole small body wanted out and toward. And Rin put her hand over her sister's hand on the lever and held it and said the contract out loud into the ringing dark, both their hands shaking together, "Whatever we hear," even her voice, asking. "The only way we protect her is to make her a liar." The torch ground lower. Nim made a sound like the tag's 2 pulses twice and held on to her sister's hand and did not open the door, and that Mara would think later, every time she thought about that night, that was the bravest thing anyone aboard did in the whole action. 11 kilos of child, locked in a steel box with the wall singing, keeping a promise in the dark. Mara came down the drive room companionway 40 seconds later with no frame, no plan, and a fire suppression bottle she'd ripped off the corridor wall, and the universe handed her exactly one favor, Gathy's back. She put the bottle's full discharge across his cutter hand at 4 meters, frost flashing over the torch head, the plasma feed sputtering out in a cough of vapor, and then Brasson hit her. He was good. He'd been waiting for the rescue, of course he had. That was the entire point of cutting a hatch you didn't need to cut quickly. The children were the anvil and she was the work. And he came off the dark side of the companionway with a shock baton and an absolute economy of motion and took her down onto the deck plates, with her ears ringing and the bottle skidding away into the dark. "There she is," he said, not unkindly, almost relieved, kneeling on her back, reaching for her wrists. The unstable third party. "Ma'am, on behalf of the sponsorship, you are detained pending." Two things interrupted the sentence. The first was that the deck section under his knees and shins, and not under Mara's chest, because the man at the drive room board had spent 3 weeks mapping the plating circuits to the centimeter, and had been waiting at the switch for half an hour with his heart in his teeth, went to full magnetic charge, and every ferrous plate in Brasson's boarding rig slammed flat to the floor with a clang like a cathedral door, taking Brasson with it, spread-eagled, immovable, swearing into his faceplate with great fluency and rising panic. The second was that Gath, frost-burned hand and dead cutter and all, turned to run, and made it exactly one stride before walking into the drive-room companionway's emergency containment door, which Tully closed in his face from the board, gently the way you close a cupboard. Mara got up off her own deck slowly. Her side was one long stripe of fire where the baton had caught her. Her lip was bleeding somewhere salty, and her hands, she noticed remotely, were steady as bench fittings. She picked up the dead cutter, looked at the citadel hatch, scorched hinge-deep along one edge, holding the steel barely a third cut. Rated Brasson, it's almost like the woman who provisioned it had met you people, and crouched down at the locker's complate and pressed it and said, in a voice that did not shake at all, because she would not let it, not with the channel open, "Status in the box." A pause. Then Reen's voice, clerk flat, magnificent. "Sewell's in the citadel. 3 air's good." Nim wants it noted she didn't open the door. "Noted for the record," Mara said. "Pay packets docked for the racket out here, though. Some of us are trying to run a quiet ship." And from inside the steel came a sound she'd have crossed the combs again barefoot to hear. 2 children laughing and one shouting "Ma'ar in." Scandalized, double-noted protest. And she stood up, wiped her lip, looked down at the lieutenant spread-eagled and humming with magnetic charge on her deck plates, and said, "You were right about everything, by the way. The ducks, the lure, the rated box near my strength. Genuinely good work." She patted his armored shoulder twice, like a foreman signing off a shift. "You're just on a ship where the children read the searchers a manual before you docked. And son, they had you priced by the second sweep." It was somewhere in there, reviewing the boarding party's collapsing channel from his position at the ventral lock, that Malkaldree understood what every searcher of children eventually taught himself not to know. That the small and the hunted do not stop learning because you own them. They learn you, your pairs, and your wands and your board, swiping thumbs, and someday, somewhere on ground you were arrogant enough to walk onto voluntarily. All of it comes due, he understood, and he did the intelligent thing. The thing he had always done at the moment a venture soured. He cut his losses. He turned quietly, mid-transmission, leaving his 8-strap potted frozen and dogged-in men where they lay, and went back down the docking tube to take his launch and go. And the launch did not answer the helm, because 40 minutes earlier, a flat scuttling toolbox of a maintenance crawler had walked its magnet feet across the docking collar, found the launch's external service port, and politely fed 3 meters of strap band into the intake of its attitude thruster manifold. The tube lights came up. At the far end of it, at her own ventral lock in the lit hatch ring, stood Mara Quint out of the frame, empty-handed again, with a deck behind her that had stopped pretending to be dark. And behind her, at her shoulders, where they had flatly refused not to be once the all-clear rang the citadel hatch, 3 small gray shapes with their ears up. "Saul's aboard?" Mara said. 5 plus 11, detained boarders and you. I lied on the manifest earlier. It bothered me all afternoon. Dree stood in the dead launch's hatchway, charcoal coat still perfectly squared, and assembled one last time, the warm oil voice. "Captain, this has gotten badly out of hand, and most of it is genuinely my fault, and you have me at a disadvantage I admit I have never once been at before." A small, rueful, beautifully made laugh. "Name it, the note torn up, the salvage uncontested, an endowment for the children, papers, schooling, trusts, real ones, audited. I'll put the pen in your hand. You're a businesswoman, the first one I've met in years. There is a number, Captain. There is always a number." And Mara, who had been waiting 29 days to spend this particular coin, said, "The hand settles its accounts. The instrument will be orphaned." The silence that came down the docking tube then was total, and in it the mild library face changed, not into rage, nothing so honest. It simply stopped performing the way a screen stops, and what sat behind it looked out at the 4 of them with the flat calculation of a man, pricing damage, and found, for the first time in a long career, no purchasable surface anywhere in view. She was in the conduit, Mara said. Small spaces. It's what they're for, isn't that the line? You spent years drilling children to fit into the gaps in other people's attention, and then you stood in your own back office and priced one of their lives out loud, and it never once crossed your mind that the walls had learned to listen. That's the file I couldn't close, Tree. Not the seal, not the freight. You budgeted a little girl under sundries. She stepped aside from the hatch ring and gestured. Hostess, pleasant, at the open livestock pod waiting in hold 3. Walk yourself in. The pod's clean, the air's good, and the manners you'll get from this crew are the manners you'll wish you'd given them. We dock at Cetero in 5 hours. The Freight Guild's assessors are meeting us at the buoy. I filed for escort when I filed the salvage claim. Your cargo now. And as he passed her immaculate, silent, contained, she added quietly, for no one but him, itemized Cetero ring. The next morning ran out of composure by stages. It began at the guild counter, trailing edge, where a battered freighter with a grapple-scared spine presented for audit 11 hours inside her, deadline, account current, contract technically discharged, 34 membrane containers, beacons live, log drifting in a tidy recoverable spread at the comb's edge with recovery underway, the shipper's agent torn between fury and the novel pleasure of full insurance compliance, and the freighter's master then laid on the counter, in order, a salvage claim time-stamped on 1 military surplus cutter, a citizen's detention report for 1 Mauchel and 11 licensed security contractors, all delivered alive and strap-banded into guild custody pending warden review. A formal complaint of bond instrument fraud and conspiracy against a guild bearer, and the bearer herself, washed, braided, ears level, who set a black hexagonal slug on the scarred countertop with both hands and said in exact accented trade, "I'd like to open my container now, please. There's a manifest. I'm it." By noon, the bonded yard's gate camera feed was the most watched transmission on the ring. The Meridian Compact's resident inspector, a stooped, gray-whiskered old man who had spent 3 years filing unanswered tracers on a hijacked relief convoy, stood in the yard's cold storage bay and wept without embarrassment as the container cracked and the first crate registered "live-in intact" on his reader. Surgical cultures, graft tissue stock, regenerative lines, 41 crates, everyone called in advance, in order, from memory, by a Yeveth child standing on a freight skid to see over the inspection table, while guild assessors cross-ticked her recitation against the physical count with rising professional awe. She missed nothing. Of course she missed nothing. She had been made to be a manifest by a man who believed that what a thing was made to be was all it could ever become, and that belief was now, itemized and witnessed, the evidence sinking him. What followed the way collapses do, paper first, then people. The guild froze every instrument the hand had ever touched within the hour. Bearers had been endangered. The corridor's seals were being repriced even as the wardens were still pretending to deliberate. And once the guild moved, the warden's Dree had discovered urgent reasons to have always been incorruptible. The Provident Holdings Trust unraveled in days. A financial inspector with the wonderful, weary name of Ock found the trust's purchase of mortgage instrument 7741 K had been funded through 3 accounts that all drained back to the Korriban's Freights escrow, and the assignment was vacated as an instrument of fraud, the note reverting to the Halloran Combine, who reviewed the attached publicity, the salvage award pending in their Morkagor's favor, and the Recovery Commission filed for her by the Meridian Compact and concluded. Garrick delivered this in person, suited, sour, and as close to smiling as the man's face allowed, that Captain Quint's paper was, at present valuations, boring. Lamar was arrested at a private dock with outbound passage paid. The cutter's salvaged logs gave the wardens her hiring chain whole, and the Dree Foundling sponsorship's remaining wards, 43 of them across 4 worlds, woke one morning to compact case officers in the dormitories and the blue and white open hand coming down off the doors. And that, Mara thought, watching it on the ring feeds with a mug going cold in her hand, that was the only line of the whole account she'd have paid to watch twice. Mauchel Dree never stood trial in a courtroom. The guild adjudicated him under freight law, which has no chapel voice and no charm in it anywhere. Bond fraud, bearer endangerment, conspiracy against an instrument. The published sentence ran to decades of labor adjudication, and the unpublished truth ran underneath it like keel cable. That every system in the corridor now had his face filed next to the words "endangers," the seals, and there is no parole from what a guild remembers. He went into custody the way he'd walked her docking tube, immaculate, silent, priced, and out of buyers. The medicine went home. That was the part Mara had not let herself plan past, and it happened anyway, with forms, 41 crates of compact tier regenerative stock, recovered intact, routed at last to the Yeveth resettlement clinics it had been stolen from, and the compact's gray-whiskered inspector, signing over the recovery commission to the master of the kestrel's wage, paused with his stylus up and observed that the compact's surgical schedule on Cetero ring had, by an arithmetic he personally found very beautiful, a cold chain surplus in an open theater, and that he understood there was a boy. The graph course took 11 days. On the 12th, in a recovery room with a viewport, Seth of the Varus ring looked out at the traffic lanes of Cetero with both eyes and no lag, and read the registry numbers off the passing hulls one by one, faster showing off, until his voice cracked in the middle of a tailfin serial and he had to stop. And then he turned and looked at his sisters and at Tully, and last and longest at Mara, looked at her the way you look at a thing you have only ever heard, assembling her, line by line, and what he finally said hoarse was, "You're exactly the right amount of worn looking. I had you priced perfectly." And Mara laughed until her ribs hurt and docked him a day's pay for insulting his captain, and he wore the fine like a medal for a week. The registry office, last of all, on their final morning on the ring. A counter, a clerk, a terminal old enough to vote. Crew manifest amendment, vessel kestrel's wage, 80 meters, 4 holds mortgaged, 11 months of notes left. The salvage and the commission having gone where Mara's ledger soul demanded. Seth's account square with the compact. A documented trust for each child that no hand but their own could ever open. And the balance against the principal, because debt you could see the end of, was just rent. And she'd decided she could live with rent. The clerk read back the amendment in a bureaucrat's flatline. Master M. Quint, Engineer T. Brandt, and entered as minor dependents of the master, with guardianship recorded per compact displaced persons provision. Rin of the Varus ring, Seth of the Varus ring, Nim of the Varus ring. Residence of record, the vessel. Sign here and here, souls aboard, 5. The clerk stamped it without looking up, the way the great hinges of a life always get stamped, and said next. They walked back to the ship through the morning market, the 5 of them, in no formation at all, which was itself the miracle. 29 days of formation, the eldest always between her family and the door, and now they straggled, Nim orbiting a fruit stall, Seth reading every sign out loud because he could, Reen walking beside Mara with her hands easy at her sides and 62,410 script formally written off in this morning's ledger over her strenuous scandalized objection. The argument had lasted 2 days. Mara had ended it the only way it could be ended, with an entry. Debt forgiven, paid in kind, services to vessel and master in full and then some. Ryan had read it 4 times and then closed the file very carefully, the way you close a thing you intend to keep forever. That night, underway, outbound for the membrane recovery, and then a grain contract, and then wherever the boards pointed, the kestrel's wage settled into a running rhythm, and Mara walked the spine on last rounds the way her father had, hand-trailing the conduits, listening. Galley dark and clean. Tully's snore buzzing the trunk hatch like a loose fitting. The spare cabin, the children's cabin. It had stopped being spare a month and a lifetime ago, glowing faint red at the cracked hatch, 3 bunks now, though the small one's was empty as usual, and the small one was wedged in against her sister, both breathing slow. Seth's new eyes moving under their lids, dreaming in pictures now maybe, and on the shelf above them, in a cradle Tully had machined from salvaged brass without telling anyone, a worn miner's tag sat with its face turned outward. Listening, receive only faithful, its little light asleep. It would never ping again, and it would never be put away. Some instruments stay on the books after the account closes. Any clerk knows that. Mara stood in the hatch light a moment, counting her cargo, the way she did now every night and intended to do every night for the rest of her life. 1, 2, 3, all stowed, all bound for somewhere, none of them hiding. Family's already aboard, she said, barely a breath, to the ship, to the tag, to the man who'd asked her at a shoal buoy whether she knew what those children actually were. She'd never answered him. She answered now to a sleeping corridor, with the whole of her father's debt strangled, grapple-scared, paid for an 11-month ship, humming under her boots like a struck bell, mine. Then the captain of the kestrel's wage dogged the hatch to a crack, never closed. That was a standing order now, and went forward to fly, like her namesake, who works the wind all day for no wage at all and keeps what matters. She just gets to keep flying. And aft in the redlit dark, a small gray hand found the blanket's edge in its sleep and did not reach for a lamp because there was nothing left anywhere in the night worth signaling for. Everything the light had ever been for was already here, holding still in the wind, carrying them home by carrying them.